Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of What's Your Perspective. Today we are going to talk about designing workplaces and how we can increase the level of productivity and creativity with architecture. For today's episode, we have Peter Knutson from A+I Design Agency, and together we're going to check some of their amazing office projects and talk about their design process. So stay tuned because we have a lot to cover. Hope you enjoy it.
Well, I'm Peter Knutson. I'm a partner and a principal at A+I. Been here about 20 years, and I run. My title is Chief Strategy Officer, but I run a lot of the front end engagement with clients. And under me, I have teams of graphic designers, brand designers, strategists who work. And as we were talking just before we started recording, work and often are trained as architects and work with the teams that come up with the vision for the early stage project. And I'll talk a little bit more about the way we do that because I think it's a unique process and I think it makes a unique architectural product in many ways. But A+I has been around about 28 years. Again, I've been here for 20 of those. And it, even at the very beginning in '96, when the my two friends and partners, Brad Zismore and Dag Folger, founded the company. They founded it to do workplace. And it was a different time for workplace. In '96, it was just, it was the beginning of the internet. It had the World Wide Web had really been around a couple of years. Companies were starting to figure out what that might mean for them as entities and, in the world of the internet and whatever you want to call it. And companies were growing to capture parts of that market. So it was the beginning of a dot-com boom in New York, which was every bit as exciting as the dot-com boom out on the West Coast. And A+I did, dozens and dozens of early stage tech companies. Some succeeded, some failed. It was a churning time for business. But the really interesting thing about it, and what I think sort of founded us, or our ethos, was all of these companies were beginning. They might even only been 10, 12 months old at the time they needed office space. They didn't have a culture. They didn't have a culture in space. They were building their culture as they went. And so we sort of learned and built kind of on our own in a vacuum ways to engage with founders, to engage with their teams, to understand how people work and how the architecture around them shapes the relationships that they build with one another and helps drive what they're trying to do. And so when you do project after project after project at a sprint, the way it was in the '90s and right up until about the early 2000s, you cut your teeth on a way to think about workplace much differently than just people sitting in desks and rows and working for somebody who sits in an office on the corner, which honestly, with a few exceptions, the history of the architecture of workplace had been quite, hadn't evolved much from Frank Lloyd Wright and Johnson Wax or Burrow Landschaft, 20 or 30 or 40 years before. And so we've stuck with that as our central thrust, really, is designing the spaces that people work and that companies engage themselves as physical spaces with their body politic. And that's been really interesting to understand sort of culture as a reflection internal of what brand is as a reflection external. And companies are really good at setting up their brand and pushing their brand out in the world and designing for that and understanding how design services that. And we're less good at and are getting better and more savvy and more sophisticated, but at the way that design can tell the story of culture internally, if you see them as sort of different perspectives on the same argument. And in that time, we've started to do base building architecture. Some of the firms for which we did headquarters, we do the houses of now, the founders. We have done retail and hospitality work. We do a lot of building scale work for developers now, which is almost a different perspective on workplace, which is the buildings that need to engage and entice tenants to come and live in them and make them their home. What does a building do to tell a better story about the community that's within the floors of the building? And New York is vertical and the buildings are stacked. And so you could do 500,000 square feet and it's only a tiny part. Well, it's significant, but it's not the whole building. And so people are living with one another. Companies are living with one another. They're not isolated campuses as much as they might be in other cities or parts of the world. And so that's been our perspective as well, is is how is business a community, and how are the people who work together telling each other their stories and living a significant part of their life with one another. How do you make that both productive and generative and exciting and satisfying, not just to the person who writes the check or founded the company, but to everybody whose hard work is actually making the company happen. And so we built very much a philosophy of work. And when we tell people about it, we show it as a triangle, which is cribbed from an economist, a woman named Elinor Ostrom, who won the Nobel Prize in economics for studying self-governing institutions. And she found that cultures can found self-governing institutions that persist if the governance, the rules of the society, the people who live under those rules and promote those rules, and the space they live in are in harmony. And so we see that triangle as the governance or the rules of society is really understanding what leadership wants to get out of it, out of an organization. The people are all of the people, including the leadership, and the expectations they have one another, and of course, space is space. And we feel like we can design at all three of those points, and we can hopefully, if we build a strong strategy that tells a story of what the company wants to do in space, how space is an element to and to service it, we can build a really, really robust and strong environment for the work they want to do to happen. And I think, it's something I feel pretty passionately about, and I think it works really well. I think our architecture is judged. I think it is beautiful, and I think it formally tells a lovely story. But I also think it's really robust and strong in terms of the users and the role that space has to play for them. And so I see judging our architecture as well. And a couple of projects I'd love to talk through today are very much about how the success of those projects is both in the aesthetic of the project, delivers, but also in how that project is consonant with a core piece of the identity of the company. It makes the company a better company because they're in a space that tells their story and supports the way that they get things done. And so it's a lot to say, and I think I'm not trying to be too self-promotional about it, but I do really believe in thinking that way about architecture and approaching it from that lens rather than simply an ethic or ethos or ideology or aesthetic, let's say.
And I think one thing that is really challenging in your work is that you have to be in such a high level of communication to just be representative of their brand, their company, their idea. And that's a really hard strategy. Can you explain more about how you get sync with them and how you can get this key factor of how you can represent their companies?
Yeah, well, thanks for asking the question, because that's sort of my whole reason for existing, and in this firm and talking to you is that we sort of early on realized and built what we call a strategy department, but it's a design, conceptual vision, business prospect, department, whatever you want to call it. That's a terrible term, but really what it is sitting down face to face with as many people as the client can stomach letting us have access to, and talking to them, not really about the space they want. We never ask people to tell me, what you want a desk to be like, or what style of, collaborative space or community room is going to solve for your problems, but just talking to them about who they are, what drives them, what's interesting, and more how they engage and communicate with one another, and what's positive and what's negative, and what sometimes it's almost like a conversation where you're hearing the gossip in the back room. But what it really does is you speak to leadership, you speak to people whose job is to make the decisions, and the pressure is on them to make good decisions and grow a business, and that's their pressure. And you talk to people who do all of the work of an organization and whose collective work builds up to the success of a company. And you talk to them about all of the stresses and needs and hopes and desires of them. And you figure out somewhere how they overlap in a way that builds a vision of what a company in space can be, what that community of people that do a thing can be. And I say this, and we talked earlier, we're just under 80 people now as a company, and we work with a very kind of a very specific level or scale of organization. one that has, enough people that there are diverse needs and diverse talents in an organization, and lots of verticals and lots of types of work being done that sometimes don't communicate very well, but not too big that everyone is a number. A company, when it gets to 20,000 employees, 30,000 employees, they're building systems, they're building strategies around structures rather than around individuals. And we really thrive on being able to talk to individuals. And if you're a company of 1,200 people, we can meaningfully engage with somebody who represents everything in an organization. And we build a map of the organization conceptually and how they communicate and who needs to, be closer to whom, and what services and special support they need. We recently finished the headquarters for Peloton, the fitness product and media company, and they build a bicycle, and they build a treadmill, and they build a rowing machine. They build the engineering, so the back end technology, they code for getting that information into the device and letting you see a fitness instructor in front of you. They have fitness instructors, so they have talent. They have to run a talent organization. They film the media. They have a whole broadcast facility and studio. They have a logistics company which makes sure the bike gets to you and gets set up properly, and they have their own retail facilities and trucks. It's a complicated organization. And like those tech companies I was talking about earlier, they grew from about 175 people when we started working with them. When we first started interviewing them and talking to them about the future, they grew from 175 people, and the headquarters we designed for them was for 2,100 people. So over the course of 18 months, they grew from 175 people to 2,100 people, which is a huge growth. And they grew in all of those sectors, and everybody needs a different thing and has to be a different person. But one of the first things that we learned was the CEO wanted everybody to feel like they were equal to the organization and they were all pulling together. And so the strategy for that whole project could be boiled down to treat everyone equally, support everyone uniquely. So everyone should feel like walking in the door of Peloton, they are equally important to everyone else, so that they can feel like a community pulling forward. But everybody has a different need. The woman who's designing the bicycle, or the pedal for the bicycle, the industrial designer, she needs a shop. She needs 3D printing technology. She needs CAD on her computer. She needs, balsa wood she can carve, whatever her tool is. The coder who's making the back end needs 2 monitors in a dark room, and he needs to sit there for 12 hours as he gets deep into code. The woman running the fitness retail marketing needs, models and a seamstress shop, and needs to build those things. We had to figure out how everybody could walk in, sit at desks that were identical, sit amongst one another, feeling equally empowered and equally supported. But just behind them, they had the tools, they had the R&D lab, or they had the testing facility, or they had the media center to support them. So that you get those challenges, you make a really simple statement, and what tumbles down from it are a million decisions that need to be able to focus back on that mission and say, okay, I understand how to solve this problem architecturally, in space, in volume, in shape, in services and support, because I understand what the company wants to deliver, and I understand everyone's need below that. And so that's how it all works here.
And what's really interesting is that in that specific case, they don't have a clear idea of what's their company gonna look like when they are like 2,000 people. It's really your responsibility to predict that, how we're gonna manage like this whole people that they don't have a clear idea now, how they're gonna look like in the future. So that's really
Right.
a good way of predicting the future and give an answer to their needs.
Well, and I think, the world changes, and what that company was when we were designing their headquarters is different than who they are now. But if you can figure out what's core to the essence of a person or an institution or an organization, and socialize that with them, speak to them with it, have conversations about it, and build it together, that statement of purpose, you're much more likely to have that solid statement of need and purpose if it's core to who the people are, than simply an aesthetic or a understanding of a company, or a vision or a reflection of who they are now transported to the future. If we had designed the same space that 175 people needed, just multiplied by 10, it would have been a failure. We had to build a representation of what a company wanted to be and who they believed they could be, and do it correctly, understand what that would actually mean in terms of the millions of dollars they had to sink into it to build a space. And the story that space needed to tell all of the employees, a majority, 9 out of 10 employees had never been in the company before, landed in this new space and had to know amongst colleagues that had never seen that before either and couldn't tell them the ropes and couldn't explain the company to them. They had to feel it viscerally when they walked in the door. Oh, this company is this. I can understand it. And I understand what my colleagues do. And I understand how we're doing this together. And I think that for them, I think it worked quite well. It's, the challenges of running businesses are outside of the challenges of building architecture. And so we can't, take any, we can't say any of it is due to us, either positively or negatively, but we can say that we can be their partner to build who they want to be in a space in the future. So.
And you know what? I think this,
Go ahead,
I think this person-centered, this person and individual-centered type of approach, if I'm not mistaken, it only popped up around maybe 2 decades ago. Where before I didn't notice it. It was more like correct me if I'm wrong. It was more of a traditional type of approach, and now it's more centered on the values and interests and ideas of an individual person. So what do you think jump started this type of strategy in terms of approaching an office design and a culture in a specific company?
It's a really good question. In that I think it's a lot of things, and I don't have a ready answer for this, but I'm going to just, say a few things that I believe have or that contributed to that. I mean, I do think that it's been a slow evolution. We all think technology kind of exploded, but onto the scene. But computers and digitization of work has been happening for 50 years, essentially my whole life, and I think that had a lot to do with it. Work is becoming more intellectual and more creative, even in conceivably non-intellectual or non-creative avenues. So when you something as simple as when you have, and I'm going way back, something like Lotus 1-2-3 or Microsoft Excel, and suddenly your accountant isn't writing numbers in a book. They're thinking about ways of structuring the future because they have a spreadsheet that they can model and they can change things on. Suddenly that's a creative enterprise, even if you're an accountant. It's no longer just a tabulation and enterprise. And I think about that a lot because, we're designing for these people whose jobs are seen as sort of functional, but who are actually quite, creative and influential members of an organization, top to bottom. And I think that has everything to do with the automation of things and the tools that the digital revolution has pushed on us. And I think that secondary to that is when you get companies in the world that are very much focused on that, the Googles and Amazons and Apples and Microsofts and NVIDIAs of the world that are at their heart creative organizations. They're making new things and they depend on their employees to make new things. You really have to understand how to support and develop creativity out of your organization, and how do you put people in the best possible chance to work together, because it's all a collective, to work together to be creative. I think that really changes how you see workplace. If it's, we have an analogy, and we have a beautiful image in some of the materials I talk to sometimes of a man sitting behind a printing press, and then we've done work in that exact building where that exact printing press was, and it's a woman sitting in a sofa in a new office, working through her workflow on her phone, right? It totally changes what and how you're perceived by your employer when your job is less pulling a lever or inserting a piece of broadsheet into a printing press than it is when, you're managing information and creating new ideas out of the flow of information. And I think, Google and those companies that radically reinvented what workplace should be. And at the beginning, it looked crazy. It was colorful and it was slides and trampolines and a lot of meaningless stuff to the workplace. But I think it was more of a cannon shot. It was a symbol that said, this is wholly different than rows of desks and cubicles and cream colored, PCs and a water cooler, and you work until 5:30 and then you get up and you walk away. And it was more, and I think about this, working in a creative industry and being asked to create as a matter of my job, it is a very unpredictable inspiration. You have to often work long hours with no success and suddenly a flood of success, right? You build whatever structure that you're trying to conceive of, and suddenly the pieces fall into place. But that happens through spending a lot of time and a lot of energy thinking through problems in different ways from different perspectives. In your mind, turning the problem from a different way and understanding how it's structured differently, and suddenly you realize ways that you can knit it all together to serve all of the different constituents, or all of the different needs, or all of the different challenges to a design problem. And I think that is the way a lot of companies that were previously seen as, oh, we make cars, I work on an assembly line, or we're an accounting firm, I do accounting, or we're consultancy, I just sit and listen to a business problem and tell them how many people to fire, essentially. But I think over time, as companies have all become creative industries, they've started to realize that they have to cater to that slightly more fragile creative need. And the spaces are different. The way people work is different. The benefit of space to a person is different. It's different than a factory line. It's different than a row of workstations or a secretarial pool, which we're not that far away from when businesses work that way. And I think, I always think in New York, leases are 10 to 15 years typically. What you were 10 or 20 years ago when you designed the space you're working in is from a different era. It's 2 generations ago sometimes. It's another world. The legacies, architecture is so slow to change. The legacies of 20 or 30 years ago are still the current realities of a lot of people we design for. And to help them understand the next generation is sometimes radical for them. It doesn't look radical to those of us in the industry every day, but to the people who only see change in these very sort of very structured, quanta of 10 or 15-year lease cycles. It's amazing. It's really, really revolutionary sometimes to pull a person out of one environment and drop them somewhere that actually supports the way they've been working for 15 years, but haven't been able to, through the way physical space works, haven't been able to change their world around them.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's so great that they come to this realization that how it can change their level of productivity, like creativity, like how many active hour their employee gonna have in the company just by the design of this place. Like that how it can change like their entire level of like working experience. And that's a really important like matter here.
And it's been a change in how the people we engage with as architects on the commercial workplace side, and some of the development side, but how both the people who build buildings for workplace and the people who make the ultimate decision about where they're going to put their company and what their company is going to look like and what are they going to financially support from an architect or from a designer. The individual used to be someone who worked in finance, who knew the numbers and said, this is how much we're willing to spend, this is where we're willing to go. Or someone like a CEO, and in not too long ago, that CEO was invariably in the United States was a 50 to 70-year-old white man who lived in the suburbs and took a car and wanted a place to park it and wanted it close to transportation or close to his home. And I say his, and I mean him at the time. And those were the decision makers, and their priorities were serviced, and everyone else's priorities were considered only as much as they didn't impact those individuals' priorities. And it's different now. You talk to HR professionals, you talk to users. Our development clients, one really large developer in New York, we've done a huge kind of reimagining of all. They have 13 million square feet around Penn Station, and we've helped them reimagine what they could do on almost a civic scale to turn that neighborhood, which, like a lot of transit neighborhoods, 750,000 people come in and out of Penn Station every day. It takes everyone and shoves everyone up onto the street and sucks everyone back in at night. Even the city has trouble controlling what that neighborhood looks and feels like. It's a challenge when you have that much pressure of people. But that developer has begun to realize that within their buildings, they can tell a different story to the people who are going to rent and the people who are going to be there. And we spent a year talking to individuals, talking to kids coming out of school and people who would visit and work and deliver packages and get their first job and meet their spouse in these buildings, and ask them what was it that motivated them about being in a city like New York? What motivated them to to take their work elsewhere in this era where our work can be as mobile as possible. And we started to invest that into the space that this developer had all around Penn Station. Helped that developer understand how to think about tenants not as tenants but as customers, which I think is really important, because a customer is a different story. You're looking to the customer to be somebody that respects and revels in your product and wants to be, I don't like to use the word consumption, but wants to be there, wants to be part of that environment, wants to engage with it. And that's a lot more like social spaces. It's a little bit more like a civic square than it is like a lobby and an elevator and a desk and a task. And I don't want to make it sound too high-minded, but it transforms how they think about the space they build and what they're willing to invest in. And especially when it's no longer the CEO, and he or she is no longer able to dictate where they go based on their personal needs and preferences, but is asked and is pressured to consider everyone else under them. Well, maybe it's interesting to talk about a couple of concrete relevant examples through space. And I can tell you, I've told you a lot about sort of a philosophy of how to approach a company and what it might mean, but it might be interesting to show you, because architecture is an experiential physical medium.
Yeah.
And it's always, I don't know how you guys feel. I always feel like it's so unfortunate that you can't bring in a venue like this, you can't bring your audience into a space to sit and experience it, because there's something that a photograph captures, and there's a lot that a photograph doesn't, and there's things words can express, and there are a lot of things words can't. But let's let me show you a few spaces, and we can talk about what the kind of work I do and the work A+I does means to those spaces, if that's all right. So because I think it's kind of interesting, and depending on who's watching this right now, what it's like to work in an office like ours, and what we kind of, I've talked a lot about how important the needs of everyone in an organization are, to considering how an organization should design itself in space. And I think we thought that through with us too. We're in New York. We've been for our entire 28 years. We've been almost the entire 28 years been in one city. We had during the initial .com boom, we had a San Francisco office as well, but it felt better as an organization to consolidate us to be all together. And we're about 80 people, like I said, just under 80 people on one floor of a building in the Flatiron District. And for 25 years, we've been within 2 blocks of this location, moving around periodically as we grew. But this is our office. We all sit out in the open. We all sit in collaborative sort of teams. We're 3 studios. The studios don't have a perspective. They're all very much the same and are omnivorous as to the kind of projects they do. But it really allows us to have 3 mini offices within one larger office. And that allows everybody working to know who they're working with, know all their colleagues. Because once you get to 80 or 90 people, you cease to really understand what everybody's real talents are. And because we design as a collective, we design as a group. There isn't one design voice that leads. There isn't one person who makes every design decision. There are leaders who help make sure projects get designed well and deliver for clients. But everybody has a voice in this office. And what you're seeing right now is sort of how we've designed our office. It's a big long shot from block to block. So behind me is 22nd Street in Manhattan, and in front of us there at the end of the screen is 21st Street Manhattan. And we're fortunate to have the whole stretch through the block, and everybody sits together and within sort of, sometimes unfortunately, earshot of one another. But we built this huge marble bar. It's 60 feet long next to you, and it's this sort of totipotent thing where it can be a meeting space. We can have an office dinner there. It can be where someone sets up a presentation or a client meeting all along that bar. It's this element that allows the whole office to kind of organize around it. But it also sort of divides how the office works. You see on the right side, all our meeting rooms, all glass fronted, all facing that space. And on the left side in this image is where everyone works in these little pods of folks. And as you go down, it kind of continues. The back half of the office is a little bit bigger. That bar stops. You can see it ending on the right. But part of what that does is it leads everyone who comes in. You saw the elevator vestibule, that black kind of void, but everyone comes into the office, even clients, and is guided here, which is sort of the social heart of the space. And we want our clients to feel like they're part of the design team as well. And so we want them to be able to come into the center of the office and find the people they know and walk over and sit down next to them and look at what they're doing and talk to them about what they're hoping to do. It really, that communication you talked about, spending a lot of time with clients, spending a lot of time speaking to them and understanding them and having them understand you and understand the challenges and decisions you're making on their behalf, is all about building that community and that relationship. And so this is the space where we build a relationship. And I had three requests when we moved to this office about 9 years ago or 8 years ago. I cycle to work, so I wanted a place to hang my bike near my desk so that it wouldn't get stolen. I wanted a shower so I could clean up when I got to work in the summer and it was sweaty. And I wanted a record player embedded in the marble bar we were building. And I got the record player. I didn't get the rest, but I've got my record player, and I every once a week or so, I bring in a stack of records from home so that everyone can kind of play and have a good time. And there's always music in the office because I think it's a nice white noise mask, but it also, connects everybody and something to talk about. And someone can hate what's playing and run over and pull the needle off and put what they want on it. And it keeps things alive and social. We host our weekly happy hour at this desk, and it's a place where we get together and what you're working on, which can be isolating sometimes. If you're the one architect on a small project, this is the space where you can feel less isolated and more connected. And like I said, we have graphic designers and brand designers and architects and interior specialists and people who have extreme focused technical skills and people who are real broad thinkers. And like you're seeing there on the left, they're all in a room, they're all in a meeting, they're all talking, creating together around a project, guiding one another through what a design should be, so that the best idea wins out in our position. And typically, the answer for what the best idea needs to solve is in the room with the client. They're going to tell us. They might not know they're telling us. We might not know they're telling us. But if we work hard enough and think analytically enough about everything they've told us, we're going to figure out what it is that they're absolutely trying to do. And that's where we seek to guide clients to. And that's the kind of that's the kind of work we do across the board. So I was talking to you about Peloton earlier. Peloton's on the upper right-hand side there. That's part of, you have 9 stories in this building over sort of in South Midtown. And it's part of that, equity and community we were talking about, that everything is connected and everyone can feel when they're around that staircase that weaves and meanders its way through the building. At that point, they can realize that everybody who works in that organization out of the New York office is aligned with them and is within visual connection to that staircase. So it's part of that social connectivity. These are just sort of the other projects we work with. They're very tactile. I think we work to make very diverse environments that support a bunch of different ways people work. And I'm going to jump into a project which is wildly tactile and wildly diverse.
But before doing that, Peter, I have a question here.
Yeah, please.
Let's talk more about your own process in your company, like A+I.
Yeah.
How you deal with time management? Like you explained about like this communication level with your client, but there is a whole communication level in your company.
Yeah.
Like how you can manage this like time management for the design to be ready to represent another company, another brand. That's quite challenging. Yeah,
it is. And these projects in our office, they move quickly. It sounds like we've got hours and months and years to sit and ponder, but oftentimes we have a couple of weeks. I think what it comes down to is part of it is, design is not just the most intensely creative person who can visualize a thing and put it on paper. Design is very much looking at the arc of a project and structuring how it's going to come together, the milestones that drive sequencing. Big architecture projects have a lot riding on them. There's life safety. There are unforeseen elements in space, especially when you work in old buildings built 150 years ago, that invariably come up, and that is a design of management. I think it gets back to what I was talking about earlier, which is that invariably everything is creative. Are you thinking creatively about how you're organizing the sequence of events to make sure you get all of these people sitting around talking about a project, designing together? Are you understanding where strength lies in your team and tasking those people to push forward certain elements in parallel with other elements that another person whose strength is something else can push on their strong point, and pull them together frequently and with direction? So it's not that you don't lead. It's that we are dedicated to not leading by dictate, but leading by having everybody understand the goal we're trying to solve for, and work collectively in parallel to do it. And sometimes it works, fabulously well. Sometimes it breaks down. I mean, we have long nights sometimes when, the next day the thing needs to be presented, and we realize we haven't arrived yet. But a lot of it has to do with pulling together what a meaningful sequence and schedule of creative engagement is. So who comes in when, and how does the team work together? A story I always tell is that, we have brand and graphic designers and architects and strategists and interior designers and sort of all of the creative elements of a team at the beginning of a project meeting with the client. We like to have them longitudinally to the end of the project. And it doesn't always exactly happen that way. But what it is it's more understanding through history of projects and similar projects, when those skills really become valuable, when they add and advance a project, and when to bring those people in so that they don't feel like they're being dropped in to execute a task and then torn off of a project, but they feel like they almost like a team member. I'm going to talk in American football because I'm an American, but it's pulling in the fullback when you need to gain 1 yard. When that talent needs to be there and needs to push forward whatever you're trying to achieve. So it's kind of a loose, sloppy answer to your question, because every project is different, every client is different, every demand is different. The needs of architecture oftentimes are the same, and it's you have to be juggling literally a million different possibilities, and slowly but surely pin those variables down as you go forward and understand, where you have space to do a thing, what the mechanical impacts and demands are, what structural impacts and demands are happening as you maintain this beautiful vision that you put in front of a client in the first, 4 or 5 weeks of a project as to what's going to happen as the world throws every possible obstacle to getting that vision in front of the client at the end. So yeah, it is really the talent of management as well. And we tend to pride ourselves at A+I that we don't differentiate between the project manager role and the project designer role. We want those who are running the management to be talented designers as well, because we feel like that person needs to understand that the outcome is going to be successful to the strategy and is going to fulfill all the client's needs and is going to be beautiful. And we have design ideology. We have an idea for what design is going to try and achieve on any given project. That manager has to know that they have to be the aesthetic critic, the best aesthetic critic on the project. So they know when a thing looks like it has potential and we push it forward, or when a thing looks like it's a dead end and they pull back from it. And so it's kind of why we're the size where we are and not larger, and actually not smaller, is because it takes a lot of people, takes a lot of diverse talents. And it can't scale. I don't think we could ever be 1,000-person architecture firm, because we need to commit. And we demand a lot of talent of the people that work with us. We demand that they're creative. Everybody is if we were doing our job right in finding and nurturing staff, everybody's as creative as the next, and trust one another implicitly.
And having this type of open office and have this level of kind of friendship and be at ease at the workspace, I think it's going to pay off during your communication with clients, and it shows in the design process as well.
Yeah. Well, and I do a lot of talking with clients even before they're clients, talking to people about what design could do for them. You could call it promotion, but oftentimes, and I think it's part of our ethos and part of the way we work, is usually they're just very generative, creative conversations. Clients often end the conversation, find someone else, but hopefully they got value out of the discussion with us about what's possible and how to really think about who they are and how that can work. And I always say that we as an organization, especially my colleagues with whom I've been working for a couple of decades, we are incredibly we're incredibly good in a room and incredibly good talking to clients, because we treat those meetings, those initial meetings with somebody who might be a client, just like we treat these meetings in our office, where we come into a room with people we care about and talk about solutions to problems we care about together. But yeah, I make it sound very much like it's a casual chat, but it's a lot of individual work and a lot of collective discussion. Actually, I'd love to bring us to a project which I think expresses that too really well,
Sure.
and kind of gets to the core of what we do, and that thinking about creativity as a discipline, as a business as well. I'm going to stop sharing for a second. I'm going to jump to those pictures because there are a lot in between. Or it's this. It's so. That whole how do you consider space as an engine or support structure, not even an engine, a support structure for creativity.
Thank you guys for watching this video. And don't miss our next episode, because we are going to discuss about this amazing creative workplace, Clubhouse.